What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so whenever I hear people say things like, back in the 60s, in the 70s, the talent pool was inferior in the NBA, and, they played against plumbers and all this stupid nonsense, I shake my head because they never really know what they're talking about, man. People on television and sometimes some people on here. So, if you really look at the 1960s, it was actually a decade of explosion of talent in the NBA, even if there were only 8 teams or 10 teams or 12 or 14 teams. The way I look at it, because there was fewer teams, the talent pool was higher, because if there were more teams, you'd have inferior guys qualifying for the NBA. So Wilt and Bill Russell and Nate Thurman and all these guys, Willis Reed and Bob Lanier, they played against each other much more frequently. There won't no nights off. There won't no days like Nikola Jokic where, unless you're going against Joel Embiid, you're going up against, marginal, mediocre stretch bigs. So, of course, you're going to get easy looks at the basket, easy attempts. I mean, most of these guys most of these centers today don't even know how to guard people in the post anymore. These guys have been taught to shoot threes. They don't know anything about guarding people in the paint. But anyway, I digress. Gus Honeycomb Johnson was doing things in the 1960s that players decades later were getting praise for. Vince Carter didn't invent the dunk. Dominique Wilkins didn't invent the dunk. Julius Erving didn't invent the dunk. And I'm not saying Gus did, but Gus was a pioneer because he helped to break down walls when it came to flying above the rim, because around the time that he was playing, it was still a stigma about dunking in games. It was still a stigma. Now, I'm not saying players didn't do it on occasion, but it was looked upon as showboating, right? It was looked upon as showboating. I suspect earlier in the NBA, there was a racial connotation behind that, because generally speaking, outside of a few guys, more of your dunkers were black players. So if they were doing it, it was looking upon as being hot dog or whatever. But still, as a general rule, players didn't really do it much, unless it's a follow-up shot or something immediate, not showing up the opposition, whatever. But then, you started having guys who could fly above the rim and dunk. Elgin Baylor, of course, was one of the first guys dunking the basketball. But Honeycomb was something different. I mean, Honeycomb was doing power dunks. You know what I'm saying? Like, he was doing dunks like Dominique Wilkins. Nobody was doing what he was doing at that time at his position. You didn't have another guy in the NBA his size. I mean, he was a forward who was 6'6", 235. I mean, he was huge for that era. He was sort of like Charles Barkley, but without any fat on him. And it wasn't just that he was a dunker. He was a great, great defensive player, a tenacious competitor, and a great, great rebounder. But he's not really known in today's game. He's just not really well known. He's not remembered. And I think it comes from the fact that, he played so long ago And he played for not the Boston Celtics, not the Lakers or the Knicks, but he played for what is now today the Washington Wizards, primarily in his career. And his career ended playing in the ABA for the Pacers back in 1973. He was born in Akron, Ohio, and no, he's not related to that guy. He was born in Akron, Ohio, December 13th, 1938. And he was one of 6 children. As a teenager, Johnson frequented bars and pool halls. Johnson attended Akron Central High School, where he was an all-state player and did reasonably well in the classroom. Among his teammates was Nate Thurman, a future Hall of Fame center. As we all know, grew up in that area. And as we all know, some people like to say he was possibly LeBron James' daddy or some crap like that. Despite Johnson's clear talent and athletic ability, he had just a few college athletic scholarships offers, which was fairly common for black high school athletes in the late 1950s. Johnson had enrolled at hometown Akron, but he left before basketball started and joined a nearby amateur athletic union club, or AAU. While playing for the AAU Cleveland Pipers of the National Industrial Basketball League in 1960, he was spotted by a former teammate of first-year Idaho head coach Joe Cipriano. Johnson accepted Idaho's scholarship offer. He played a year at Boise Junior College to get his grades up as a sophomore and averaged 30 points and 20 rebounds a game for the Broncos. Johnson then transferred up north to the University of Idaho in Moscow in 1962. Not Moscow, Russia. The Vandals had a 500 season at 13-13 the previous season, and the addition of Johnson made an immediate impact as they won their first 5 games and were 12-2 through January. Idaho was actually undefeated throughout January, with Johnson playing. Due to NCAA rules, junior college transfer originally enrolled at a 4-year school. At the time, he was allowed to play regular season games only and not tournaments. The Vandals went 1-2 without him at the Far West Classic in late December in Portland, and the victory was a 1-pointer over WSU. A week earlier with Johnson, the Vandals routed the Cougars by 37 points in Moscow. It was around this time that Johnson began to acquire the nickname Honeycomb, a nickname Cipriano gave him because of his sweet play. As a junior, he averaged 19 points and 20.3 rebounds per game during the 62-63 season, leading Independent Idaho to a 20-6 record, their best record in 36 years. Despite their 20-6 record, the Vandals were not invited to the postseason. The 1963 NCAA tournament included only 25 teams. Oregon State and Seattle U were selected from the Northwest. The 1963 NIT invited only 12 teams, with none from the Mountain or Pacific time zones. If the Vandals had been invited, Johnson again would not have been eligible to participate. Johnson turned professional after his only season at Idaho, and Cipriano moved on to coach at Nebraska. Without Johnson and White, the Vandals fell to 7-19 in 1963-64 and were 4-6 in the new Big Sky Conference, 5th place in the 6-team league. Johnson got a somewhat late start as an NBA player, as he turned age 25 in December of his rookie season. He was selected 10th overall in the 1963 NBA draft, taken in the second round by the Chicago Zephyrs, who were in the process of moving to Baltimore, to become the Baltimore Bullets for the 63-64 season. Johnson was an immediate starter with coach Slick Leonard and averaged 17.3 points and 13.6 rebounds per game. Johnson finished as the runner-up for the Rookie of the Year honors to Jerry Lucas of the Royals. Lucas went on to a Hall of Fame career with the Royals and the Knicks. Lucas and Johnson had faced off against each other during high school in Ohio, and when the NBA All-Rookie team was selected, Lucas, Johnson, and his former high school teammate Nate Thurman were the top 3 stars of the team. Johnson was both an outstanding inside scorer and an exciting open court player for the Bullets from the start. During his early years with the Bullets, an expansion team, regularly finishing last place not only in the Eastern Division but in the entire NBA. However, with good first and second round draft choices every year, the Bullets gradually grew to be a better team, adding these players who all made the NBA All-Rookie team. Honeycomb, Rod Thorne, Wally Jones, Jack Marin, Earl Monroe, and finally the keystone of the championship team, Wes Unseld, who became both the Rookie of the Year and the MVP in 68-69. That same year, the Bullets won the NBA Eastern Division for the very first time. Johnson was among the most effective two-way players of his time. His scoring moves around the basket were comparable to those of his peers, Elgin Baylor and Connie Hawkins. Yet, however effective as Johnson was as a post-up player, with his medium-range jump shot and on the fast break, he was even more effective as a very sticky defender and a rugged rebounder throughout his time in the NBA. Indeed, he was one of the select few players who was quick enough to be paired against backcourt great Oscar Robertson, yet strong enough to hold his own against the taller forwards of the NBA in the front line. Despite some growing nagging problems with his knees, Johnson was a member of the NBA All-Star team 5 times. During his NBA career, Honeycomb averaged 17.1 points and 12.7 rebounds per game. He also scored 25 points in 25 minutes in the 1965 NBA All-Star game. For the next couple of years, Johnson was in the prime of his career. But by 1971-72, injuries kept Johnson on the bench for much of that season, limiting him to 39 games and 6 points per game. That season would be his last with the team. The next season, the Bullets traded for Elvin Hayes and drafted Kevin Porter, making Johnson expendable. In 9 seasons with Baltimore, he averaged 17.5 points, 12.9 rebounds, 2.9 assists, and 35.2 minutes in 560 games. Johnson was traded to the Phoenix Suns on April 12, 1972, completing a transaction from 2 days prior when the Bullets acquired a second-round pick, 25th overall in the 1972 NBA Draft, and selected Tom Patterson. Johnson played 21 games before being waived in December. He averaged 7.8 points and 6.5 rebounds in just 20 minutes under head coaches Butch Van Brederkoff, fired after 7 games, and Jerry Colangelo, Johnson's former Baltimore teammate. The Indiana Pacers, then of the ABA, picked up Johnson after he was recruited by the Pacers by his former Baltimore coach, Hall of Fame inductee, Slick Leonard. He played his first game with the Pacers on December 16, 1972, and became a steady and veteran influence of the young team, which went on to win the 1973 ABA championship. He played in 50 games with the Pacers and reunited with his former coach, Slick Leonard. Johnson averaged 6 points and 4.9 rebounds, playing alongside 22-year-old future Hall of Famer George McGinnis, Hall of Famer Mel Daniels, Hall of Famer Roger Brown, Freddie Lewis, Donnie Freeman, Darnell Hillman, and Billy Keller. In the ABA playoffs that year, Johnson and the Pacers defeated the Denver Rockets and Ralph Simpson, not Sampson of a decade later, but Simpson, 4-1, and the Utah Stars with the Hall of Fame combination of Zelmo Beatty and Iron Man Ron Boone to advance to the ABA Finals against the Kentucky Colonels with Hall of Famers Artis Gilmore, Dan Essel, and Louis Dampier, who I believe is the all-time leader in three-point field goals made in the ABA. In the 1973 ABA Finals, the Pacers defeated the Colonels 4-3 to capture the ABA championship, with Johnson playing 13 minutes and grabbing 6 rebounds in the decisive Game 7. Johnson would retire after this season. Sadly, Gus Johnson will not be blessed with a long life. Shortly before his death from inoperable brain cancer, his number 25 was retired by the Washington Bullets on his 48th birthday in December of 1986. Upon Johnson's death, Bullets owner Abe Poland remarked, quote, "Gus was the Dr. J of his time, and anyone who had the privilege of seeing him play will never forget what a great basketball player Gus Johnson was." Before his death and reflecting on his career, Johnson expressed that his greatest fear was that he would die and his daughters, quote, "don't even know what their daddy did," unquote. He died in an Akron hospital on April 29, 1987, at the age of 48, and is buried at Mount Peace Cemetery in Akron. He was survived by his 4 daughters. This is what players had to say about Gus Honeycomb. Earl Monroe. Gus was ahead of his time, flying through the air for slam dunks, breaking backboards, and throwing full court passes behind his back. He was spectacular, but he also did the nitty-gritty jobs, defense and rebounding. With all the guys in the Hall of Fame, Gus deserves to be there already. Abe Poland, former owner of the Washington Wizards franchise. I first saw Gus on television. I had never seen a player dominate a game so. Gus was the Dr. J of his time, and anyone that ever had the privilege to see him play will never forget what a great basketball player Gus Johnson was. Wes Unseld. Gus was one of the greatest players I ever played with or against. He was a ferocious defender and rebounder, and as a young player I was completely in awe of his ability. He was truly a star ahead of his time. Slick Leonard. If he played today, old Gussie would be a human highlight film. That's what people remember the most, but there was a lot more to his game than the spectacular dunks. He was special. He could play, man. Dave DeBusschere. Gus was probably one of the roughest players I ever played against. He was not a dirty player. He was one of the most tenacious competitors ever to play the game. As far as accolades is concerned, ABA champion, as I mentioned, 5-time NBA All-Star, 4-time All-NBA second-team player, 2-time NBA All-Defensive First Team, NBA All-Rookie First Team. His number 25 is retired by the Washington Wizards. His number 43 is retired by the Idaho Vandals. For his career, he averaged 16.2 points per game, 12.1 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per contest. Gus Johnson's best years, statistically, were between 1963 and 1971. And it's not showing up yet. During those years, there we go. During those years, Gus Johnson averaged, give me one sec, 18.3 points, 13.5 rebounds, 2.8 assists, and shot 44% from the floor and 70% from the foul line. Some people call him a mixture. You know, I've seen this before. A mixture of Charles Barkley, Scottie Pippen, and Dennis Rodman. I've seen that comparison, or a combination of Charles Barkley and Scottie Pippen. I've seen that description of his game. Like I said, Everybody always said these guys were nothing but, 6'4", white, what. Nah, there were some big guys playing. And can you only imagine if he was blessed with maybe the surgeries that these guys have, plus some of the other things they have access to, you know what I'm saying? Wink, wink. You can only imagine what type of career he could have had if he was playing today. But anyway, tell me what you guys think.